While researching for my net zero feature, I spoke to a pair of industry experts. Henry Saunders works as the sustainability manager for Tunbridge Wells Borough Council, while Dan Hamza-Gadeka set up Integrate to Zero. Here's what they had to say. Current generations may delay difficult decisions, leaving the heavy lifting to future generations. So, should we be doing more now to prevent greater harm later?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to kind of what's the word? To kind of zoom out and unpack that question in the sense that because there are very, very significant strides that the current generation, current world leaders have made in tackling climate change. And it's easy to forget that it was only in the 1920s or early 1900s that the link between fossil fuels and a warming climate was actually made, which actually in the grand scheme of things is not that long ago. And I do feel that significant action has been taken. We've got, global agreements to limit, you know, greenhouse gases. We've got global agreements now that actually specify transitioning away from fossil fuels. We've got global agreements to limit temperature warming. We've got significantly developed nations committed to climate change, committed to net zero targets. And I think that is that's a massive, massive win and a massive step in the right direction as to what we should be doing. There's obviously certain economies and certain countries that can be doing more. The US, for instance, has flip-flopped back and forwards between being a part of the Paris Agreement and not. The recent president, Trump, has just indicated that they're going to withdraw from it again. So we don't really know. We know that the US policy on climate change has now, in the last 100 days, changed drastically to what it was before. So, more can absolutely be done in from that instance. But I'm absolutely for, you know, fast-paced action. It's called a climate emergency for a reason, and it needs to be treated as such. And the adequate and right resources need to be given to, governments, countries to accelerate that action and ensure that you know the world does achieve net zero by the 2050s, which is what's set out by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as being the kind of you know approximate date that we need to achieve net zero before we start reaching those tipping points. So yeah, I hope that's kind of answered the question.
I've got a question here. Net zero strategies, for example, wind farms, solar fields, and bioenergy crops can impact biodiversity, land use, and water systems. Is it right to compromise local ecosystems for broader climate goals?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'll answer it on one level, which is if we don't tackle climate change and we see even more frequent, more intense, and longer climatic events, then ecosystems will be destroyed. So, in some ways, it's a bit like sort of arguing about how we organize the deck chairs on the Titanic, right? So say, oh, let's make sure we put them in a really pretty row, but actually the ship is sinking. So you can look at the problem a little bit like that. You say, oh, don't touch that local ecosystem. You don't do anything like that. But if we do that and we don't solve the problem, then the local ecosystem is going to be buggered, right? So that's one way of looking at it. But actually, I think there are other kind of like smarter, more interesting, creative ways of looking at it, which is how do you find the win-wins where you say, how do we manage local land in the right way and at the same time do that in a way that reduces emissions? So I'll give you a really interesting field that's emerged called agrivoltaics. Agrivoltaics is the combination of solar panels and agriculture. And I mean, Italy just put 8 billion euros into agrivoltaics. The United States has put multiples of that amount into it. It can apply to both livestock and to crops. For livestock, for example, a number of countries and huge swathes of their farming communities have realized that solar panels provide shading for sheep. And when you have really intense heat waves and weather and the grass is otherwise burnt, then the panels are creating microclimates that's allowing the grass to grow, which is food for the sheep, and that the sheep are actually also even better than trying to find a lawnmower to try and cut the lawn between the solar panels, which would otherwise the grass would grow too long and overcome it. So it's about how do you work out the co-benefits, the two things together. The second example in agrivoltaics is that the creation of these microclimates. So by creating shading, either with panels at this level or this level, you can tilt, and some panels can tilt and turn and move around. By creating a microclimate, you change both the temperature and the amount of precipitation. And so when you combine that with the growth of certain crops, which need a certain level of precipitation or temperature that they're not getting, particularly as the impacts of climate change become worse and farmers have to adapt, and they're at the front line of a lot of this, and they're already suffering. Then the research has found that a number of crops, chilies and lettuce and berries and other stuff like that. Different countries are going through the list. Their scientists and their universities are going through the list to say which types of crops in which configurations of solar panels increase productivity of crops rather than decrease it. So it becomes not a is it solar or agriculture? It becomes how can solar and agriculture come together in order to protect the local community, actually to have an economic benefit and to do something for climate change at the same time. But there is no one answer to this. It varies by country, it varies by climate, and it varies by crop. So this is a huge research project. That's the kind of effort that's needed, rather than in this country, for example, we went, no, don't use any land for solar panels, even though more land is being used for golf courses, for example, than would be used for solar panels if we times 10 the amount of solar panels that were being used for land. I mean, some of these debates get put completely out of context, but we went for well, this is terrible, rather than hey, hang on a minute, why don't we do some research into this? Well, we actually are now. So we're starting to look at it in the UK.